Scream 6 is coming out next month, and I thought before it came out, I would do a more of an in-depth review, obviously containing spoilers for the first 5 Scream movies. And I usually whenever I review a movie, depending on when it's came out or what type of review I'm doing, I'm going to be very very general and not give away hardly any spoilers if I can. And what I consider to be a spoiler is typically even the tiniest of details. But obviously, talking about certain things such as the Scream series, I do want to go more in depth and put a little bit more thought into what I'm saying as far as how I'm able to go over the details of the movies. So now, if you look back on the movie Scream, the general impression is that it started a kind of a new wave of horror movies. It was a movie that was copied. Posters from movies that came out afterwards always had the floating faces look to them, and all the characters seem to be have this tongue-in-cheek knowledge of horror movies. Um, it was just something that they seemed to have at that time. They were a generation of people slash characters that grew up on slasher movies of the 80s and other horror movies of the times. All these mid to late 90s and even early 2000s horror movies had this kind of hip 90s feel to them. The soundtracks had this kind of a post-grunge rock music and underground lo-fi type music as well, mishmash amongst all of them. A lot of the soundtracks were really good. It really put you in the place of the time period that the movies came out in. Now, taking a look back when Scream was released, it was actually released 7 months after what some might call the first of the new wave of these type of horror movies, The Craft, which, funny enough, starred 2 actors from Scream. Now, to me, The Craft kind of set you up for Scream. It set you up for the type of world, the type of characters, just the whole feeling of what you were going to be expect during this time of quote unquote new wave horror slash slasher movies. And yeah, so The Craft was kind of getting you prepared for what Scream was going to do. And what Scream did was actually kind of connect 2 eras of film. You had the new wave of slasher movies as well as the previous wave, just slasher films. As the film starts, it starts off iconically with one of the most famous opening scenes in movie history, the killing of a well-known actress of the time. She wasn't Drew Barrymore wasn't like a huge A-list name or something like that, but everyone knew who she was, and you could almost feel that she was going to be the lead of the film, especially since she was on the main poster. Having her in this role actually, for me, creates more tension because you always wonder, well, is she in this beginning scene? Could she somehow escape? Does she actually have to die? Will she die? Even Marion Crane made it 47 minutes before she actually died. And it's in this beginning scene that Scream actually kind of establishes several things that it's going to be known for. A couple of things that it will establish is that past horror movies will play an important role in the movies themselves, and that gore is going to be a factor. It's going to be not necessarily gory with the kills, but the aftermath is definitely going to show some gore and some shots that will cause movies to be edited down, let's say, because obviously Scream was edited down a little bit for the gore. But these 2 things definitely play a major role in the films of the entire series. And that's because even though the films will take kind of a light-hearted approach to the plot and the mechanics of everything that's going on, the gore in it does tell you that, hey, this is still a serious matter. It's not a true making fun of slasher movies or anything like that. It's not satirical in that regards. It's more playing homage to previous horror movies in an updated setting of the late 90s, early 2000s. As is a running theme with many a slasher, we get our suspicion raised right away in the second scene of the film when you have someone who could be the killer. In fact, it's Billy who Skeet Ulrich, playing opposite of his love interest from The Craft, Nev Campbell, comes off very, very creepy. It's very understated how he plays this character because you can see why she likes him. You can see why he's kind of like the bad boy. He's not necessarily a jock, but he's kind of like the good looking guy that many of the girls in school will kind of pawn over. And he might be a little creepy, but it's just the way he is. That helps with his bad boy image. So the way he describes watching The Exorcist, and even little actions that he does with with the way he talks and moves around is all pointing to the audience and saying, yeah, we see why he can be like the good looking bad boy, but this guy right away he has to be the killer, right? I mean, it's all too obvious. Or you could be in the camp that thinks, okay, well, it is too obvious. He's definitely going to be a red herring of the movie. Whichever way you guess, I don't think that the movie is going to be faulted for being too obvious who the killers are, and it wants you to think that anybody can be the killer, whether it's obvious or a surprise. Just don't be the person who watches a movie and says everyone's the killer, and then when the killer is revealed in the end, you say, "Oh, I knew it all along. I predicted that." Also, in this scene, we learn that Sydney's father is going away on an extended weekend, going to an expo, and apparently it's from like a Thursday to a Sunday. But yeah, he's going to be gone. He's going to be out of the picture, which definitely sets up some further details that come about later on in the movie. The iconic fountain scene introduces two more characters to round out our odd bunch group of teens. If only Stu worked as a butcher or something like that, then this would not come off as creepy as it did. But he immediately starts explaining what it means to gut someone. He kind of glorifies in his description, and immediately, just like Billy, and even more so, you begin to wonder, well, okay, if he's not a butcher, does he actually really? I mean, he explains it in a way that makes you think that he's probably done some research and he knows what he probably learned how to gut someone and probably did it already, or maybe he's just a fan of true crime and he's going to be yet another red herring. Who knows? Then we get hit with, which is most assuredly the big motive for killing Casey and Steve at the very beginning, which is Casey dumps Stu for Steve. We also get introduced to fan favorite Randy, the type of character who is rarely ever the killer in a slasher movie. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the killer from a 1983 movie called Mortuary. Kind of a down on his luck, kind of nerdish character in the school that would really like to get with the beautiful main girl, but he has no chance, and he's kind of bullied upon. But Randy is not necessarily bullied. He's actually kind of a friend of the group. He's there. The movie doesn't really lead on too much to how much of a friend he is with the group, but he's definitely liked and accepted by the rest of them. So with his character not being one who's bullied as much, the first attack on Sydney always felt like a dream sequence, kind of like from A Nightmare on Elm Street. She does wake up on the couch, obviously from taking a nap, and then is therefore attacked in the following instances. And as a viewer, you know, okay, well, surely an established main character now in the movie, she's definitely the main character. Surely she's not going to die. And you find out later on in the movie the whole reasoning for the third act taking place where it does is exactly 1 year after the anniversary of Sydney's mother's murder. You know that she's not going to. You know the killers had no plan on murdering her in that scene. So I think it is a very interesting thing to have in the movie, whereas you look back on it and you can visualize that, oh, it was just a scene to be placed in the movie to have some extra scares or some extra suspense. And it was just kind of thrown in there for that. But what it does is actually have the killers trying to set motives for one another. It's not really something that is explored a lot throughout the movie. But once again, you have Stu, who does this later on, but he is providing somewhat of an alibi for Billy. At this point in the movie, you have pretty much every reason to believe that there's probably just one killer. I mean, most movies there is just one killer. Uh, Very rarely do you have more than one, especially working in tandem together. But I mean, how could Billy be the killer if he's climbing through Sydney's window just seconds after Ghostface is chasing her? In a clever little setup where she actually runs up the stairs, obviously because the front door is locked, but she does go up the stairs after she was kind of mocking heroines in previous slasher movies from doing that same thing. I think it just goes to show you that people can look back on a movie and kind of make fun of it, but then in a real life situation, you kind of do the same thing, so it's actually warranted. So, yeah, so I don't think Scream is actually trying to make fun of these previous movies. It's kind of like sticking up for them. But anyway, she goes into her room and does the clever closet door trick to trap the ghost face outside the door. Billy comes in through the window, so he can't be the killer. There's no way he teleported around that fast. But he does have the suspicious cell phone, which obviously couldn't work today, but put yourself in 1995, 1996, and it makes sense. But yeah, so you get this idea that he's not the killer, although Sydney never makes that connection. She basically sends him right to jail. Luckily, that same evening when Sydney goes and stays with her friend Tatum at her house, that Stu comes in to save Billy yet again. He gives Sydney a call, says, "Oh, you fingered the wrong guy," and obviously yet again it cannot be Billy because he was in prison, even though he had his one phone call from prison. But that's kind of explained briefly, and then that's it. The next series of scenes has Sydney kind of being scared. She's obviously off kilter a little bit. She's her mom died a year ago. Now there's another killer out there. Could be the same killer. She's kind of double thinking her idea about something that was already mentioned before about her fingering Cotton Weary for her mother's murderer. But is she having double second thoughts? Is potentially the same killer from a year ago the killers now? So first of all, you have two clowns in the school running around with ghost face outfits on, just yelling and screaming, and kind of gives Sydney a little bit of a it's obviously that they're playing around, but she does feel a little jittery.
Why are they doing this?
Then she runs into Billy and kind of gets startled, and that's where he talks about he uses one phone call to call his dad, and she moves on to the bathroom, and then of course there's the ghost face in the bathroom, which is definitely not Billy or Stu. It's just yet another kid just having some fun with Sydney. And then you also see a couple of random shots in the following scenes of ghost faces kind of lurking around in the background, and it's never really explained whether it's actually Billy or Stu keeping tabs on Sydney the entire time, or just random high schoolers out there just having fun. And I'd be willing to guess the latter, because it doesn't really make sense for Billy and Stu to be amongst the trees or in the grocery store, but it does make sense for the film and the characters of the background characters. Plus, we know that students, male students, 11 to 24, are the ones who are most popular with local news reporter Gale Weathers. Gale Weathers and Dewey, the two main leads in the movie, representing obviously the media and the police aspects of the investigation and the murders that's going on. Dewey's ability to be an effective police officer is brought into question immediately. He rarely holds up evidence, he even scares himself. And the scene where the police show up after Sydney's attacked at the beginning, it's so strange. He's holding up the mask to the door. Sydney opens the door. She gets frightened by the mask. He turns the mask around, kind of gets frightened himself. He's definitely portrayed a little bit as a goofball, someone who probably wouldn't be able to be very good at their job because their personal life is kind of on the brinks of childhood and adult. He's just not mature enough, and how's he ever going to solve the crimes? He's constantly talked down by his sister Tatum. It's mentioned that he's only 25. He kind of eats ice cream, which is seen as kind of like childish behavior, even though it's not, but it feels like that the way he's eating the ice cream in the movie. And then in the scene where Sidney gets called by, as we all know, Stu, when Billy's in prison, Dewey kind of stumbles out of his bedroom and kind of not knowing what's going on. It's it's obvious that he wouldn't know what's going on because he was in his bedroom, but he still comes off aloof. And then Gail has this kind of, I don't know if symbiotic relationship is the right terminology, but she's there as kind of a perfect teammate for Dewey. And it's her quest of fame that kind of leads her to be the lead investigator of the movie. She definitely initially uses Dewey to be able to gain inside information into the investigation, but he almost kind of uses her as well. I mean, he obviously has a bit of an infatuation for her. He tells her earlier on that he may be 25, but he was 24 for an entire year, and whether he knows it or not, if he gets with Gail on a romantic level, it's going to help him become a little bit more mature and maybe be a little bit more respected within his own department. Although his potential relationship with Gail probably won't do much to help his sister's viewpoint on him, because Gail is presented as this character that is hated by other women in the movie. So obviously, Tatum would see Dewey getting into a relationship with her is just not a good thing. It's a stupid decision because Gail's obviously just not a person you want to be involved with. The final set piece of the movie, which actually takes up quite a lot of runtime, is the party. A place where everyone can be safe. Sidney does not have to be alone. She's going to be there. She's going to be safe. But we all know that's going to fall apart somehow because obviously we're nearing the end of the movie. This brings Dewey there so he can protect Sidney and Tatum and everyone else at the party. And although he, who knows how good of a job he would have been able to do, but it's actually Gail who does a little bit better of a job. She's actually able to place a little hidden camera in the living room of the party. As far as I could tell, it's unspoken, but you pretty much can assume that Gail found out about the party from Dewey, or she just figured it out on her own. We know how much of an investigator she is. But she's there to be able to be the reporter first on the scene. It's at this point in the movie where we have several, as an audience, we have several questions that we know that needs to be answered. One, is Cotton Weary the actual killer who murdered Sidney's mom? Is he going to be the killer here, or is he just going to be totally innocent? We also want to know, is Gail using Dewey, or does she actually have an attraction for him? And then obviously the big question with all horror movies, unless you know who the killer is already, is it going to be this person or is it going to be that person? I mean, obviously you can easily guess Billy and Stu. They're the two most obvious killers here, but it could be the father. It could be a surprise killer, Randy. It could be someone else. It could be Tatum. Who knows? Anyone at this point could be the killer, and all these questions are definitely answered in the movie, so it doesn't leave anything out as far as unanswered questions. And if anything is slightly unanswered, they're going to be answered in the sequels anyway. Most notably, the big question that is kind of answered throughout all the following films is what the relationship between Dewey and Gail really means. What makes Scream so good is how it can make even the tiniest moments in the film stand out and be recognizable and be remembered. There's some things that I never really got. There's a bit of a joke in the beginning after Billy sneaks into Sidney's room. She does the whole would he settle for a PG-13 relationship and exposes part or all of her breast. I kind of got that, but it's kind of like maybe the no nudity clause slipped in and prevented something from being fully understood. So I never really truly got that little joke, but it's still a memorable little bit anyway. There's lots of moments of quirky little acting that I don't know if necessarily were in the script from the actors, but I'm going to guess that Wes Craven kind of inserted and told characters to do little things just to kind of make scenes stand out, add more liveliness to the scenes. Like I said earlier, Billy's kind of finger and Stu's sticking his tongue out, just little random things that each little character does throughout, just weird little moments that kind of give the movie its own character. It lends itself to attach people to the film when they're watching it, to kind of make them like it, kind of, if that makes sense. Even the principal is a standout character in a role that normally wouldn't mean anything other than just maybe someone to murder, because there needs to be a murder between this one and the next one in this timeline of the movie. There's got to be something to keep the audience interested, right? But even his over-the-top acting with his scissors and the way he even his comment about school leaving out early and there's going to be a curfew. The way he says it is not normal in real life. Or his interaction with the janitor Fred, which is obviously a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but just these little moments with the janitor, and obviously being played by Henry Winkler is always fun. But his murder is a setup for something that happens later on in the movie when everyone in the party leaves, well, most everyone, to go view his dead body at the football field. So it does have meaning in the movie, and all those little bits that he has in his short time in the movie kind of adds up to be just something that really sticks out. I especially like the third act of the movie, because sometimes movies, by the time they get into the last bits, the last 30 minutes or so, they sometimes they can outstay their welcome. Sometimes they get bogged down, or things fall apart, or everything you liked is within the first 2/3, but then the ending kind of becomes tropish or just not memorable enough. But in Scream, I love the end maybe more than anything else in the movie. It's the art direction and the actions of the characters. You've already spent some time in this house, so you kind of know, you kind of have the feeling for it, even though you may not have the entire layout in your head, but it feels definitely like a real place. And by the time the actions of the third act get down, when the characters are moving around the scenes and moving from room to room, and the way they're positioned, the blocking and everything, it really makes for an enjoyable experience that you're still wanting to sit in your seat and see what happens on screen. And the reveal of the killers in this instance comes as no surprise. You're like, oh, it's Billy and Stu. I think for a lot of people, they come off too much of a red herring, and you think, okay, well, maybe this is going to be a surprise at the end who the killer really is. But as with many real life murderers, the most obvious person is the obvious persons in this case. And then, of course, we get the whole setup of the killer not always being dead and comes back for one final scare. That's going to be something that's going to come up in later Scream movies, and it's definitely something that you almost look for, you kind of almost expect after the first one. There's definitely some great moments with Billy hitting Stu with the phone, and the real reaction, or the way that they're stabbing one another to try and make themselves look innocent for the big reveal once the cops get there and figure out what happens. And just everything works. And that's the biggest thing that I can say about Scream is, like I said, sometimes movies fall apart in the end, or by the time the killer is revealed, you're like, okay, I get it, but it's time to end things. I really like how this movie just kind of plays out, and how this happens and this happens, and then Sidney dons the ghost face. Just, does it make sense? Not 100%, but it's still fun, and it makes sense for the characters in the movie. Sidney kind of, in that instance, kind of almost overcomes her fragility, overcomes her jumpiness. I mean, we already saw her get a little bit jumpy with kids running through the hall or the fake ghost face in the bathroom, she definitely is on edge. But it's at this point that she's kind of taken over things, and she's stepping up her character a lot. And sometimes what may not make total sense, the victim putting on the killer's costume, but it makes sense for the character and makes sense for the viewer to understand the revelations in these characters. The one of the biggest things in the Scream films are the phone calls, and you get the iconic Ghostface voice, you get the iconic conversations. It's going to be something that has to happen in all Scream movies. If not, well, you're not a Scream movie, right? The way the killer plays games over the phone, and actually rewards correct answers, even though he gives an easy layup question to Casey at the beginning, then tricks her. There's not too much of the horror movie questions. Thinking back on it, I mean, you only get a couple questions regarding horror movies that the killer taunts the victim with, but it's these conversations that kind of make you wonder. Is it that the more knowledgeable about horror movies you are, maybe the more likely you are to survive the movie? Randy is obviously the most knowledgeable person on horror movies, and he survives. We know that Sydney, while not being a huge fan of horror movies, knows tropes of, the victim running up the stairs rather than out the door into safety. So she obviously has seen enough horror movies to know what's going on. She survives, and Gail survives, and you might consider she might know a lot about horror movies. She certainly has an investigative mindset about her. She wrote a book about Cotton Weary, and she investigated that, so she probably has some knowledge. She lives. Dewey, I mean, how can he die, right? I mean, he's kind of a lovable character, and he deserves to be there at the end, although it's never explored how much he knows about horror movies. But Casey, she knows enough, but she gets tricked. She doesn't know that Mrs. Voorhees was the killer in the original Friday the 13th, so she messes up. She gets off because of it. So it's just kind of an interesting thing I'm going to try and focus on, is of how much characters in the future Scream movies, how much they know about horror movies versus how much they don't know, and if that could mean something about them living or dying. Maybe that's just a nothing thought. Maybe there's something to it. We'll see. But that's just kind of a thought I had when watching the Scream yet again this time. And with all the talk about famous slasher movies in the Scream series, for newer viewers of the films, it should almost come with a disclaimer for you to watch certain movies before you watch the Scream series. I definitely urge anyone who has anyone who's not seen these classic slasher movies to watch them no matter what, but they would be good to watch them in preparing for watching the Scream series. When you rewatch these movies, you know that Billy and Stu are the killers, so as being portrayed not as the killer until the reveal in the end, throughout the movie now, you can almost root against them. There's reasons to. A, you know that they're the killers, but B, when they're portraying themselves coming off as creepy, that's reason enough for them to be rooted against. And it's kind of fun watching them in that second light of knowing that, hey, these are not just characters who turn out to be killers, these are creepy characters, and they do deserve to be kind of rooted against, even though they can still have a lot of fun to them. I mean, everyone likes when Stu gets hit with the phone at the end and makes a fuss about it, or the way he almost slobbers in a couple of his speech deliveries. You like the actor for what he's doing for that role, but you also despise the character because you understand that he is a psychotic person. Overall, I think Scream's major accomplishment is that it comes off satirical of slasher movies, and a lot of people, I think, feel that it's making fun of those, but in actuality, it's actually defending slasher movies, and that comes from obviously lovers of slasher movies, the director of previous slasher movies, people who know that, hey, these are not award-winning movies, but they can still be appreciated and loved in their own right. So as a lover of horror and slasher movies, Scream kind of tells you that, hey, it's okay. You can like these movies for what they are. They do things that award-winning movies cannot do, and they should be praised because of it. And if you're a novice, if you've barely watched any horror or especially slasher movies, and maybe you're watching Scream for the first time, you almost get to be educated on past films. The Scream is almost kind of like a cheerleader that says, "Hey, watch these previous movies. They're really good, even though they're 40 plus years old. There's still a lot of fun to be had with these." Scream. I mean, we're over 25 years from that movie. That 15, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, it's going to be able to be looked back upon and not be made fun of because it's an older movie. It's still going to have still going to give you the joys that you give from the mid to late 90s. It's going to tell you that the joys that you can have from the 70s and 80s era of slasher movies, and it's going to be able to tell you that it's okay. Taking a look back at Scream, this was a movie that I definitely saw in movie theaters when it came out. I definitely remember, even though I was like 11, I definitely remember seeing Drew Barrymore on the screen and being like, "Ooh, is she gonna get killed? Is she gonna escape?" It's kind of hard to truly remember everything, but I do remember her being on the poster and thinking, okay, she's the main character, right? The way it does things, it does not need to be too deep as a movie, but the themes that it goes over, the way it goes about having the actors do what they do, or shots happen the way they happen, or just everything about the aspects of the way it was made lends itself to be thought about and discussed further along. And that's why there's entire channels on YouTube regarding the Scream franchise. That's why there's movies still being made to this day with that franchise. So if you've not seen it and you made it this far in the video, obviously go watch it. Watch all the horror movies that Scream talks about. Dive deep into other movies that Scream does not talk about. Most of all, I think it's really great to think about Scream as, like I said, its major accomplishment of not being too satirical, but actually defending slasher movies of old and propping them up and making them and itself relevant today as it was back then.